Dermatology from the prestigious CMC Vellore. Welcome to all of you. Before we begin, remind you, you have to keep putting your questions in the question box, and that should be very exciting, as I'm sure we are going to have 15-20 minutes for that. My first question is to Dr. Prashant Ganeshan, and this is about diagnosis. So Dr. Prashant, diagnosis of primary CNS lymphoma can be challenging. I'd like you to give your comments and suggestions.
Yes, primary CNS lymphoma is challenging because it has varied presentation. It doesn't primarily present to the oncologist. So it usually goes to a neurosurgeon, and it might sometimes go to a neurologist, because most patients, the commonest way it presents is with focal neurological deficit because of intracranial intracerebral lesion. And with a focal neurological deficit, a person might go to a neurologist and get worked up, and they find a tumor in the brain. The other common presentation is with altered mental status in the form of altered mental behavior. These can be very non-specific, and I've seen many patients taken a long time for the diagnosis because of this. And sometimes what happens is, over this period of investigations, their general condition considerably worsens. And many times the treating physician of a genuine necessity starts them on steroids. This is the next problem in this. So once that steroids is started, and then you're attempting a diagnosis, sometimes these things are extremely sensitive to corticosteroids. And after that, it's very difficult to get a tissue diagnosis in primary CNS lymphoma. So the first challenge is the variable presentation. It's not always straightforward. The second challenge, particularly in India, I've seen, is to get a tissue diagnosis correctly, because these patients get treated with steroids quite often. So how to go about it is, like, we all know that a tissue diagnosis is mandatory. Without that, it's difficult for us to commit to a treatment of this much of intensity. So we don't have control over people giving steroids outside, but once the patient comes to us, we should put all efforts at the beginning itself to get a tissue diagnosis before we start them on steroid. But sometimes you don't have an option, because the patient is very sick, high raised intracranial tension. We see these very large tumors where you don't have an option but to start them on steroids. But even if we do, control the intracranial pressure as soon as possible and then go for a tissue diagnosis. That is the second thing. I've had situations where the patients are so sick, they had to have a decompression craniotomy just to make sure their life is saved. But one thing is, when they had to do that, they could get a tissue diagnosis simultaneously, and then we could start them on treatment. So in situations where you don't have a possibility of doing a tissue diagnosis, it has been suggested that about maybe even 15-20% of patients can have CSF positivity. So if you can demonstrate lymphoma cells in the CSF, either directly or by flow cytometry, that's another way of diagnosis. Theoretically, in a patient with an HIV positive disease with a classical radiological feature of a primary CNS lymphoma, like a periventricular lesion, deep white matter lesions, you can do a diagnosis just by doing EBV test on the CSF. But we actually very rarely see HIV positive CNS lymphomas anymore. So most of them are immunocompetent. So that is just theoretical. So I have not had a situation where I've diagnosed primary CNS lymphoma by doing EBV testing on the CSF. So that is just theoretical for the most part. So these are some of the challenges which I have encountered. Maybe others can share their own views on this.
Thank you, Prashant. Yes, we have time for others to chip in if they would like to, about diagnosis and difficulties.
So as Prashant said, diagnosis is sometimes based on radiology and the clinical features, because they are very deep-seated lesions and the patient is symptomatic. And sometimes this is one situation where we may take a call on initiating therapy based purely on radiological features. And there are certain MRI characteristics which the radiologist can help you with to pinpoint close enough a diagnosis of primary CNS lymphoma. So the important thing is that there are situations where we may have to take a call based on radiology itself to treat a CNS lymphoma. And another important thing that we need to consider is always have an ophthalmic evaluation in these patients, because there are about 20% chance that there might be an intraocular component also in these situations. So that is an important part of evaluation.
Thank you, Hari. So we come to Dr. Nikita. Dr. Nikita Mehra, the question for you is that there is a 42-year-old male, ECOG 0, no comorbidities, biopsy proven primary CNS lymphoma. What will be your strategies for the initial treatment? Dr. Nikita.
Okay, so this is sort of an unlikely scenario because we really, at least I haven't seen in my limited number of years, haven't seen a patient PS0. But having said that, there are two strategies, and one that we're extremely comfortable with is the De Angelis protocol. So we went from MPV to RMPV. So there was this phase 2 study that basically looked at 5 to 7 cycles of RMPV followed by a sort of lower dose cranial RT. And the outcomes were very good with it. It was overall response rates were close to 90%. You have a good median. It is a small phase 2 study, but the median follow-up is close to about 6 years. So over there, you've seen that in patients less than 60 years, the 2-year PFS was about 80%. The overall survival at 2 years was about 90%. So that is one good strategy. Now, the other is a much larger phase 2 randomized study, which is the IELSG 32. In this, they've looked at 3 arms, and the arm that did the best was Matrix, which was basically MTX, Araci, Thiotepa, and rituximab. And over there also, the overall response rate was about 87%. The median follow-up is short. In the previous study, I said the median follow-up was about 6 years. Over here, the median follow-up is about 30 months. But the data is good enough for us to consider Matrix as a frontline strategy. Treatment-related mortality in both the studies is about 6%. So I think it also comes down to logistics, financial logistics, that should also be taken into consideration. So either of these two would be my strategy for this patient as induction.
Thanks, Nikita. Would others like to contribute?
So, so basically, the cornerstone should be high-dose methotrexate. The utility of rituximab is always there, especially when we are giving lower doses of rituximab. But that was sort of negated partially by the HOVON study, which used very intensive protocols where they showed that the addition of rituximab did not contribute too much to the regimen. But having said that, most of the common protocols that we use with the data that's available includes rituximab, without a doubt. And also, in a young patient as this patient, we need to really look at giving the best protocol that's currently published, and which is probably the Matrix protocol, to get the best possible results.
Thanks, Hari. So we move to the next question, which is to Hari himself. So same patient that we just described, young man, ECOG 0, no comorbidities, biopsy proven, primary CNS lymphoma. So Nikita treated this gentleman with 4 cycles of Matrix. There was complete response confirmed by imaging. How will you consolidate this patient?
So, so the two things that comes to mind is it's unusual to find a 42-year-old primary CNS lymphoma, but we have that case over here, and we do come across those patients. He's probably got the best possible regimen currently available the best results, without a doubt. The Matrix, the ILSG 32, which is a Matrix, which showed that the Matrix component, the Matrix protocol provided the best results with the addition of Thiotepa. Now, what to do next? Because always currently, when we talk of primary CNS lymphoma, we always talk about induction and consolidation therapy. So the Matrix study itself has a second randomization, which looked into randomizing them to whole brain radiotherapy as consolidation versus giving autologous high-dose chemotherapy and autologous stem cell transplant. And it's a well-balanced study. And they had published their 2-year follow-up on these patients. And both the arms had a similar progression-free survival at the end of 2 years. So, except of course, as would be expected, that the hematological toxicity was higher with the autologous group. But when you want to look at, we are always concerned about whole brain radiotherapy inducing neurological cognitive disturbances, especially in a 42-year-old. But the study could not, I mean, the data, at least at that time, could not actually provide with conviction those results about cognitive disturbances. But what we do understand is a similar study conducted in the United States, which is the PRECISE study, which looked into the same component of consolidating whole brain radiotherapy with autologous stem cell transplant, and they had a much longer follow-up because the study stopped accruing in 2012 or 13, and following which they demonstrated that the data favored the long-term outcomes in the autologous stem cell group versus the whole brain radiotherapy. So definitely in this 42-year-old gentleman, based on the PRECISE study, my first offering to this patient would be, as a consultant, would be to give high-dose chemotherapy and stem cell transplant. And there's no doubt about that, because that would probably bring out the best results, because the difference is almost 20% better, 20 to 20, almost 89% at progression-free survival at the end of a 3-year median follow-up of 3 years or so, which over and above whole brain radiotherapy. So this is what I would offer to this patient for sure.
Thank you, Hari. Opportunity for others to chip in.
Just to add my comments here, so the Matrix study used a protocol of for their autologous transplant. They used a protocol which used a significant dose of thiotepa. So I think that is a point I just want to reiterate, that when we are doing an autologous transplant in primary CNS lymphoma, it should be with a thiotepa containing regimen, because the conventional regimens that we use does not work as well. So that is one thing. Second, with regards to the risk of cognitive impairment, which is shown in the PRECISE study. So both the PRECISE study as well as the IELSG study used a radiation dose of around 40 to 45 gray, I think so. So that is on the higher side, because there are other studies which have shown with a lower dose of radiation around 25 gray, the risk of cognitive impairment is much lower. But what we do not know is that we do not have anything comparing an autologous transplant strategy with a 25 gray radiation strategy and see whether the outcomes would be similar. So I agree with Dr. Hari that I would opt for an autologous transplant strategy for this young man of 42 years. But at the same time, we could probably get away with lesser neurocognitive defects if we use a lower dose of radiation. But efficacy-wise, whether it is similar, we do not know at this point of time.
Anybody else would like to add?
I just
Yes, Dr. Anu, your voice is not coming. You'll have to speak closer to the mic.
Clear?
No, we can't hear you.
Okay. Now can you hear me?
Much better.
Can you hear me? Okay. So
can you make it louder?
Are you able to hear me now? Maybe I should just speak loudly.
Yes, speak loudly.
Hello. Okay. So the cost and toxicity of an autologous transplant with CNS-directed conditioning is significantly higher than giving radiation therapy. I tell you, this is a young patient and he would tolerate the autologous well. But if one does have a cost consideration, giving whole brain RT as consolidation is definitely an option, because it's a fraction of the cost. With almost equivalent outcomes.
Okay. Thank you, Anu. Any other comment? This is a very important part of the discussion. Today, British Journal of Hematology has released an early article, 140 odd patients. This is a real-world data on Matrix, and this is the largest data. What they've said that in the trials, patients above 65 were not included, and ECOG 2 or more were not included, which is something which doesn't happen in real life, because 1/3 of their patients were above the age of 65, and almost similar number were having ECOG 2 plus. And the whole story to be cut short, they have shown 2-year data of 65% overall survival and about 54% disease-free survival. And this is the largest, number-wise largest data available. And they still conclude that this is probably the best treatment available at the moment with these results in real world. So we move on to the question for Dr. Anu. So now we move to an extreme of the age, 73-year-old female, compromised ECOG 2, a lot of comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, IHD. She has a biopsy-proven primary CNS lymphoma. How will you handle this patient?
So this is actually the more common setting in which we would see a primary
Anu,
CNS lymphoma.
please, your mic come very close, and I think you'll have to shout.
Very close?
Yes.
Okay. So an older person with a primary CNS lymphoma, presumably a late diagnosis because her ECOG is higher than the previous patient with comorbidities. So this is the fairly common setting in which we see a primary CNS lymphoma. There's a difference between what one would read in literature for elderly lymphomas versus the common patients in whom we see. Like we have discussed, most patients who are young would get a high-dose methotrexate protocol, and most elderly patients in literature.
So we have a problem. Maybe we'll come back to Anu. We'll move on.
Hello?
Yes, Anu, you are back. Yes.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
We lost you in between.
Okay.
You're back. Yes.
I was just saying that this elderly lady will not tolerate a high-dose methotrexate. The options for her would be giving a lower-dose chemotherapy, systemic chemotherapy, versus giving radiation therapy. And both of these are acceptable in their outcome. The outcomes would be poor in her. We would expect a much lower outcome compared to a person who gets curative therapy. That being said, in her age, she would probably tolerate rituximab definitely, with the addition of either lenalidomide, nivolumab, or ibrutinib. Ibrutinib is another, we've just seen some data where ibrutinib has very good outcomes, and all of these would be tolerated by her. The option of giving whole brain RT is also there because at a lower dose in an elderly patient, that would be an option, and neurocognitive decline would not really be a concern. Of course, I did not mention some other drugs which would penetrate the CNS, like temozolomide is one, and CCNU. These are all oral chemotherapies that would probably be options in her. So we would give the family the option which they would want to go for, either RT or IV or oral chemotherapy, a combination of IV and oral, understanding that the outcomes are not good in this setting.
Thank you, Anu. Others would like to say something?
So my only submission is that, yes, as Dr. Korula had said, that it may be sometimes a challenge to give high-dose methotrexate. But at the end of the day, methotrexate still remains the most important drug that we can actually offer. So many a time we might go on to a lower dose, like like the De Angelis protocol. It's quite a good protocol, and additional rituximab, as Nikita has said earlier, does improve the outcomes in these subset of patients. So it would not be a great challenge, unless, of course, they have poor renal function, etc., for us to look into. And the emphasis should be towards giving methotrexate-based regimen. And I usually follow the De Angelis protocol in the older SEPS group, which is very much doable most of the time.
Thank you. Others would like to say something? Okay, so we move on to the second set of questions. We come back to Prashant. So here we have I'm sorry. We are discussing the same patient that we put to Dr. Anu. So you have this patient who has a lot of problems, age, ECOG status, and the comorbidities. She wanted the simplest of the treatment, and she went to the oral drugs. She received temozolomide, procarbazine, and she accepted rituximab as the injection. There was 90% of regression of the CNS mass. Now, Prashant, how will you consolidate her? She has achieved something. Prashant.
Yeah, this is a patient who has some comorbidity issues. I think that is the reason she was not given high-dose methotrexate. So she has received something softer with the temozolomide, rituximab, and procarbazine. She has had a good response. Hopefully, her general condition has improved at this point of time. Maybe she is ECOG 1. We generally don't want to give radiation in this age group because there has been some data to show that the cognitive impairment is much higher. But again, it is tempting to give a lower dose of radiation at this point of time because she does not have a complete response. The other option which comes to the mind is something like a higher dose of Araci, 1 gram per meter square. But again, I would have to look at her general condition at that point of time to really know whether she would fit in. I would have a discussion with the family because with a partial response, if we do not do anything further, this is going to come back very fast. So I would look at the patient, I would look at her general condition, discuss with the family about the possibility of doing some Araci. The other option would be to do radiation. If the general condition does not permit me to do the Araci and the family is not ready to accept the risk of the radiation, then I would probably consider something like a lenalidomide maintenance in this patient for as long as I can give, probably 1 to 2 years if she is able to tolerate the lenalidomide. So this is what I would try for this patient.
Thank you, Prashant. Others would like to add anything different?
If she has tolerated reasonably well temozolomide, procarbazine, of course, rituximab we stop after a certain time when the blood-brain barrier closes. I would still persevere with temozolomide for some more time, or to complete at least 6 cycles of the same to try and get the responses ongoing.
Okay, Hari. Thank you. We come to now Nikita. How do you follow up a patient of primary CNS lymphoma who has achieved complete response?
So the International Primary CNS Lymphoma Collaborative Group has put out this nice set of guidelines for long-term follow-up. It's the same as lymphoma. I mean, you follow them up 3 monthly for the first 2 years, and then from year 2 to 5, 6 monthly, and then every year. What's important is besides sort of clinical history and physical exam, it's very important that the patient is assessed for their global health status and functioning of their cognitive, social, and emotional abilities. It's very important to either, so this IPCG group has a battery of tests where you look at 3 components most importantly, which one is attention, the other is motor speed, and the other is verbal memory. So you can either do the IPCG battery, you can do an MMSE assessment, but what is important is these assessments are done once the patient has achieved a complete response. When the patient has a partial response, it may not be very, very helpful to see how they're progressing. But this indicator at 2 years is very, very important to look at cognitive decline. Besides this, what is recommended is if clinically indicated, you would do a CSF or an ophthal exam, but that's not mandatory. Basically, quality of life is very, very important at follow-up besides, imaging of the brain. So you would do a 3-monthly gadolinium enhanced MRI brain or a CT if MRI is contraindicated at regular intervals.
Thank you, Nikita. Others would do something different?
No, I think that's pretty standard way of following up patients.
Thanks, Hari. So, Hari, question for you. How do you manage primary intraocular lymphoma?
So this is something that is few and far in between, a rare manifestation of primary CNS lymphoma. More than not, we tend to find ocular involvement in those patients with a CNS disease when we do the ocular examination than vice versa. But having said that, most of these patients end up with the ophthalmologist because of blurring of vision, symptoms of uveitis, congestion, and of course visual disturbances. And it's basically picked up on an intraocular examination, a slit lamp examination, and also identifying the flare response, wherein then you might have a vitreous biopsy or a vitrectomy done in these patients, wherein you find the cells and identify. So what one must understand is what is the situation that we are in, whether it is a vitreoretinal kind of a lymphoma, because we do understand that these are relatively what are called as sanctuary sites, and we are it may be difficult to get the drug into these situations with the standard chemotherapy. But having said that, it is not entirely that we do not get the drug in, but maybe not in sufficient concentration to neutralize the disease effectively. But when you talk about we talk about two distinct entities. One is a vitreoretinal intraocular lymphoma, and sometimes even more rarer choroidal lymphomas or uveal lymphomas, so on and so forth. When we talk of vitreoretinal lymphomas, the data would say that almost 60 to 70% of them would have some CNS component if you were to look at it more carefully. So a CSF analysis becomes important, and a flow would be helpful in this situation to really know and make a call. More than not, in primary vitreoretinal, the consensus is to actually treat them like any regular primary CNS lymphoma with a standard systemic immunotherapy, which is a protocol for primary CNS lymphoma. But there have been attempts to actually give local therapy in the form of methotrexate, and also to give rituximab intravitreally and it has been effective, but always in combination with systemic therapy, because if you have treated with local therapy, more than not, they have down the line relapsed more than not with a CNS disease. So the general recommendation would be to consider treating them with a standard therapy as we would for primary CNS lymphoma. The other thing is about giving radiotherapy. It is something very important to understand whether the CNS. So normally, when we give radiotherapy to such patients, we would just include it up to the optic nerve head and not include the vitreal spaces. But in this case, you need to consider for local radiotherapy in these situations. One of the exceptions to the rule where we may avoid treating with systemic disease is in the choroidal lymphomas, where we can go ahead with radiotherapy alone in these situations, and there have been good long-term outcomes in such situations. But we need to take it on a patient-to-patient basis for treating these patients. So radiotherapy is one component. Giving intravitreal rituximab has been looked at in treating such patients too. Now, if you look at another way of administering chemotherapy, one is to give intraventricular chemotherapy using an Ommaya reservoir in these patients. But there has been a benefit in terms of improving better disease control in these patients. But it is a challenge to do that. Almost 50% of the patients who had undergone an Ommaya reservoir placement ended up with having some infection down the line. So it was part of a clinical trial, but these are few and far in between. So there has been no study to actually say that one particular line of therapy. So the safest way to treat these patients would be with systemic therapy, except of course in select situations where we may consider local therapy.
Thanks, Hari. Others want to add? Okay, so we move to Dr. Anu. Our first patient, who was one of the best patients, young, ECOG 0, no comorbidities, biopsy-proven primary CNS lymphoma, received 4 cycles of matrix, received high-dose therapy with autologous transplant. Unfortunately, he relapses after 18 months. His performance status remains good. He still has no comorbidities. How will you manage this patient, Anu? He is relapsed. Anu, we can't hear you.
This patient has relapsed after initial remission.
Anu, very close to the mic.
Yeah, again, can you hear me now?
Your voice
Hello?
is also getting broken. And we lost her now. You're back.
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear
Are
you.
you able to hear me now?
We can hear you.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. All right. So this patient was relapsed after autologous transplant. Okay. So now patient was relapsed after autologous transplant. In general, the outcomes are poor, regardless of what initial therapy is given. So first, since this is a young patient and a fit patient, our first aim is to get him back into remission, understanding that overall outcomes may be poor. So the options of therapy for inducing a second remission would be, one could use the high-dose methotrexate cytosine protocol again, because patients would respond to that again. The other options of treatment really would be giving one of the novel agents. Nivolumab, there's extremely, those series are small, the outcomes are extremely good, or the use of ibrutinib, but I would initially reinduce with high-dose methotrexate cytosine protocol. And here, once he's in remission again, there's very, very little data, but in intensification and allogenic transplant would definitely be considered for him. So if he does go into a second remission, then I would offer allogenic transplant.
Thank you, Anu. Others want to add anything?
Hello.
So because there's been an 18-month gap, certainly there is a scope for rechallenging with methotrexate, no doubt.
Hello?
But one thing that we may want to consider in this young man is to use nivolumab, because this has got, I mean, uniquely they have the 6p21 chromosomal abnormality, which somehow increases the PD-1 expression, and it tends to respond to nivolumab, and it may be one of the options that can be considered over here. And of course, you have the other options of using ibrutinib and also lenalidomide with modest results over here. But first, of course, we would still think about using chemotherapy.
So, if I may add, I would agree that we would want to retry with the high-dose methotrexate in this patient because of the long gap. But one option here is that he didn't receive radiation upfront. So that is one option which we still have. So I think that we should consider in this situation, if he doesn't want to take the extreme step of an allogenic transplant, or if he cannot afford immunotherapy or something like that.
Yes.